The busy halls of Atlanta General Hospital buzzed with activity on a warm Saturday evening in March. Sarah Bennett rushed through the corridor, her comfortable nursing shoes squeaking against the freshly polished floor. At 32, she had become one of the most respected nurse practitioners in the hospital, known for her gentle touch and warm smile that could comfort even the most worried patients. Tonight was different from her usual shifts. The hospital was hosting its annual fundraiser, and Sarah had almost forgotten about it until her colleague Maria reminded her that morning. She quickly changed from her scrubs into a simple blue dress she kept in her office for emergencies. "Sarah, you're finally here," Maria called out, waving from across the hospital's transformed cafeteria. The usually plain room now sparkled with decorations and soft lighting. Round tables covered in white cloths replaced the usual long cafeteria tables, and a small band played soft jazz in the corner. Sarah made her way through the crowd, exchanging polite greetings with doctors and administrators she knew. She wasn't particularly excited about spending her evening at a fundraiser, but as a senior nurse practitioner, she knew these events were important for the hospital. "There's someone you should meet," Maria said, taking Sarah's arm. "He's been doing amazing work developing software for patient care management." Before Sarah could protest, Maria was leading her toward a table near the band. That's when she first saw James Richardson. He sat in a sleek wheelchair, engaged in what appeared to be an animated discussion about medical technology with Dr. Thompson, the head of pediatrics. What caught Sarah's attention wasn't the wheelchair, but rather his bright, intelligent eyes and the way he used his hands expressively as he spoke. "James," Maria called out, "I'd like you to meet Sarah Bennett, our star nurse practitioner." James turned his wheelchair smoothly, revealing a handsome face with kind brown eyes and a warm smile. "Sarah Bennett, the one who developed the new patient comfort protocol for the pediatric ward?" he asked, extending his hand. Sarah was surprised he knew about her work. "Yes, that's me," she replied, shaking his hand. His grip was firm and confident. "Your protocol is actually what inspired some of the features in our new software," James explained. "I'd love to get your input on some ideas I have for improving patient care communication." What started as a simple introduction turned into hours of conversation. They found a quiet corner near the dessert table where James shared stories about his work as a software engineer and his passion for making healthcare more accessible. Sarah found herself laughing at his clever observations and awful puns. "Why did the nurse bring a red pen to work?" James asked with a mischievous grin. "I don't know why," Sarah played along. "In case she needed to draw blood." Sarah groaned at the terrible joke, but couldn't help laughing. She noticed how James's eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, and how he listened intently when she spoke about her experiences in nursing. The evening flew by, and before they knew it, the cleaning staff was starting to stack chairs. "I can't believe it's already 11, Sarah said, checking her watch. "Time flies when you're revolutionizing healthcare one bad joke at a time," James replied with a grin. He hesitated for a moment, then added, "I know this great jazz cafe downtown. Would you like to continue our conversation sometime next week?" Sarah felt a flutter of nervousness. It had been a while since she'd been on a date, and she hadn't expected to meet someone at the fundraiser, let alone someone who intrigued her as much as James did. "I'd like that," she answered honestly. They exchanged phone numbers, and as Sarah watched James navigate his wheelchair skillfully through the emptying room, she realized something important. She hadn't once during their entire conversation thought of him as the man in the wheelchair. He was simply James, the interesting, funny, intelligent man who made a boring fundraiser turn into one of the most enjoyable evenings she'd had in months. Driving home that night, Sarah couldn't stop smiling. She thought about how her mother always said love finds you when you least expect it. Maybe, just maybe, this unexpected meeting would turn into something special. But for now, she was simply looking forward to their jazz cafe date and the chance to hear more of James's terrible jokes. 3 weeks after their first meeting, Sarah found herself spending more and more time with James. Their jazz cafe date had turned into regular evening meetings, shared lunches, and long phone conversations that often lasted until midnight. However, not everyone was as excited about their growing relationship as they were. One Sunday afternoon, Sarah sat in her mother's cozy kitchen in the suburbs of Atlanta. The smell of sweet potato pie filled the air, but the atmosphere was tense. Her mother, Patricia Bennett, stood at the counter, gripping her coffee mug tighter than necessary. "A disabled man, Sarah," Really? Patricia's voice carried worry and disapproval. Life is already hard enough as a black woman in this world. Why make things more complicated for yourself? Sarah took a deep breath, remembering James's advice about staying calm during difficult conversations. Mom, James is one of the most capable people I've ever met. His disability doesn't define him. What about children? Have you thought about that? Patricia pressed on. And what will the rest of the family say? Before Sarah could respond, her phone buzzed with a text from James. Hope the talk with your mom is going well. Remember, I'm making my famous lasagna tonight. Don't let anyone steal your joy. The message made Sarah smile, giving her strength. She turned to her mother and spoke firmly. Mom, I'm not asking for permission. I'm sharing news about someone who makes me happy. At work, Sarah faced different challenges. Some coworkers whispered behind her back, and one even directly asked if she was dating James out of pity. Maria, her faithful friend, quickly shut down such talk. Have you seen them together? Maria defended during a lunch break. James makes Sarah laugh more in 5 minutes than her ex did in 2 years. Meanwhile, James had his own battles to fight. One evening, as they sat in his newly renovated apartment, he opened up to Sarah about his insecurities. Sometimes I wonder if I'm being fair to you, he admitted, wheeling himself back from preparing their dinner. You could be with anyone, Sarah. Someone who could dance with you, run with you. Sarah moved to kneel in front of his wheelchair, taking his hands in hers. James Richardson, stop right there. You dance with me every day, through your words, your actions, your horrible jokes that somehow still make me laugh. Speaking of horrible jokes, James perked up, his mood lifting. What did the nurse say when she found a rectal thermometer in her pocket? What? Sarah asked, already starting to grin. Some asshole has my pen. They both burst out laughing, the serious moment transformed by their shared sense of humor. This was what Sarah wished others could see, how easily they moved between depth and lightness, understanding and joy. Over the next few months, small victories emerged. Patricia, after actually meeting James at a family dinner, found herself charmed by his intelligence and wit. She even defended him to Sarah's Aunt Ruth at church. That man has a master's degree in computer science and runs his own department, Patricia boasted. And you should see how he looks at my daughter. Sarah's younger cousin Tamika became James's biggest fan after he helped her develop a science project app that won first place in her school's tech fair. The same family members who had questioned their relationship now sought James's advice on everything from computer problems to investment decisions. At the hospital, attitudes shifted too. James frequently visited Sarah during her lunch breaks, bringing homemade meals that made her coworkers jealous. His charm and genuine interest in everyone's lives gradually won over even the biggest skeptics. One night, as they sat on James's balcony watching the Atlanta sunset, Sarah realized something important. All the barriers they'd faced weren't really about James's disability or their racial differences. They were about people's limited understanding of love. What are you thinking about? James asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. About how sometimes the biggest obstacle isn't the wheel that squeaks, Sarah replied, squeezing his hand, but the minds that won't turn. James smiled, understanding perfectly. Well, good thing we're experts at oil changes and mind-opening exercises. As the sun disappeared behind the city skyline, Sarah knew they would face more challenges ahead. But with each barrier they broke down, their love grew stronger, proving that the only limits that truly matter are the ones we choose to accept. 8 months into their relationship, Sarah and James had created a rhythm to their lives that felt as natural as breathing. Their Sunday evenings always started at Sweet Melody Jazz Club, where the owner, Mr. Johnson, now kept their favorite corner table reserved, specially modified to accommodate James's wheelchair comfortably. You too remind me of my late wife and me, Mr. Johnson would say, bringing them their usual orders. Spicy wings for Sarah and lemon pepper for James. She used to look at me the same way Sarah looks at you, son. On this particular Sunday, the club was playing their song, What a Wonderful World. And Sarah watched as James tapped the rhythm on his armrest, his eyes closed in appreciation. She remembered how, on their third date, he had explained his love for jazz. It's like life, he had said. Sometimes messy, sometimes smooth, but always beautiful if you listen carefully enough. Their shared interests had grown beyond jazz. Every Tuesday, they volunteered at the local community center, teaching computer skills to elderly residents. James would handle the technical lessons while Sarah helped calm their frustrations with her nurturing patience. The seniors adored them, especially Mrs. Watson, who always brought them her famous peach cobbler. "You know what's better than this cobbler?" James would joke. "Nothing. Absolutely nothing." Their humanitarian work extended to the children's hospital, too. James had developed a special gaming system that helped kids with physical therapy, making their exercises feel like adventures rather than work. Sarah's expertise as a nurse practitioner helped make the system more practical for daily use. One Wednesday afternoon, while testing the new system with a young patient named Marcus, Sarah caught James watching her with an intensity that made her heart skip. "You're staring," she teased later. "Can't help it," he replied. "You're changing lives, Sarah Bennett, and you've certainly changed mine." Their families had gradually become intertwined. James's younger sister Maya now called Sarah regularly for advice, and Sarah's mother Patricia had appointed herself James's personal food critic, constantly bringing him new dishes to taste. "Your mama's cooking might be the real reason I'm in love with you," James would tease, making Sarah roll her eyes even as she smiled. The couple had their challenges too. Some days, James struggled with chronic pain, and Sarah learned to read the subtle signs in his expression. She developed a sixth sense for when he needed space and when he needed her close. "You don't have to be strong all the time," she told him during one particularly difficult evening. "I know," he replied softly. "That's what makes us work. We take turns being strong for each other." Their shared love of terrible puns became legendary among their friends. They had an ongoing competition to see who could make the other groan louder with the worst medical jokes. "Why did the doctor take a red pen to work?" Sarah would ask. "In case she needed to draw blood." James would finish, both of them laughing at how bad it was. One evening, after a long day at work, Sarah came home to find her apartment filled with the smell of cooking. James had somehow managed to prepare an entire meal, despite the kitchen not being wheelchair adapted. "How did you?" she began. "Let's just say your neighbor Mrs. Rodriguez is an angel who doesn't mind lending a hand when romance is involved," he winked. That night, over perfectly cooked steak, slightly burned on one side, but Sarah thought it was perfect. James seemed nervous. He kept checking his phone and adjusting his collar. "Everything okay?" Sarah asked, reaching for his hand across the table. "Better than okay," he smiled, squeezing her hand. "I've just been thinking." Before he could continue, his phone buzzed. After reading the message, his face lit up with an expression Sarah had never seen before, a mixture of excitement, nervousness, and pure joy. "Sarah," he said, his voice slightly shaky, "how would you feel about going up to the rooftop? There's something I want to ask you under the stars." Sarah's heart began to race as she realized what might be coming. As James led the way to the elevator, she noticed his hands trembling slightly on his wheelchair's controls. Neither of them knew it then, but this night would mark the beginning of their biggest adventure yet, one that would lead to both tears and joy, and a surprise that would leave their entire wedding party speechless. The 6 months leading up to Sarah and James' wedding transformed their lives into a whirlwind of planning, laughter, and occasional chaos. Their small apartment became wedding central, with color swatches, invitation samples, and venue brochures covering every surface. "I never knew there were 50 different shades of purple," James joked one evening, holding up fabric samples. Sarah sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by wedding magazines and her trusty planning notebook. "Wait until you see how many types of whites there are," Sarah replied, making them both laugh at the absurdity of it all. Their venue search had been particularly challenging. Every beautiful location they visited needed to be checked for wheelchair accessibility. Some places that claimed to be accessible clearly hadn't considered a wedding where the groom used a wheelchair. Then they found it, the historic Mason House, an elegantly restored Victorian mansion with modern adaptations. The owner, Mrs. Mason, had modified the entire property for her late husband who had also used a wheelchair. "The moment you two rolled in here," Mrs. Mason said with a warm smile, "I knew this was meant to be. My Harold would have loved to see another love story unfold in these halls." Patricia Bennett, Sarah's mother, had done a complete turnaround from her initial reservations. She now took charge of the wedding preparations with enthusiasm that sometimes overwhelmed the couple. "Mama," Sarah would say, "We really don't need a chocolate fountain and a dessert bar." "Baby girl, this is the first Bennett wedding in 10 years. Let me have my moment," Patricia would respond, already making calls to caterers. James's family brought their own brand of excitement. His mother, Eleanor Richardson, was a retired music teacher who insisted on arranging their wedding music. She spent hours with the couple, playing different versions of their favorite songs on her piano. "Jazz at a wedding," she mused. "Well, it certainly fits you too." The most touching moment during preparations came when James's younger sister Maya presented them with a surprise. She had learned to sew just to make Sarah's garter, incorporating pieces of lace from both their mother's wedding dresses. "Something old, something new, something borrowed, something blue," Maya explained, showing them the delicate blue butterfly she'd embroidered into the lace. "And a whole lot of love stitched in between." The wedding party preparations brought their own adventures. Sarah's best friend Maria organized a unique bachelorette party. Instead of the typical wild night out, they had a spa day followed by a jazz concert, knowing Sarah would want to share the experience with James later. James's bachelor party, organized by his college roommate Mike, involved a wheelchair basketball tournament followed by a technology-themed escape room. "Only you would want to solve puzzles at your bachelor party," Mike had teased. One rainy Sunday, while working on seating arrangements, James noticed Sarah looking worried. "What's on your mind?" "Beautiful," he asked, wheeling closer to her spot on the couch. "I just want everything to be perfect," she admitted. "Not just the wedding, but the life we're building." James took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "Hey, remember what we learned at that jazz club? The best music comes from improvising. Our life together won't be perfect. It'll be better. It'll be real." The wedding rehearsal brought tears and laughter. James's father, a usually stoic man, got choked up trying to practice his speech. Sarah's young cousin Tommy, the ring bearer, announced he wanted to deliver the rings via his remote control car, leading to gentle negotiations from both families. "No remote control cars," Patricia declared firmly, while James whispered to Tommy, "Maybe at the reception, buddy." The night before the wedding, Sarah and James broke tradition by having dinner together at their favorite jazz cafe. Mr. Johnson served them personally, refusing to let them pay. "Consider it my wedding gift," he insisted. "Besides, you two are part of the jazz family now." As they sat there, listening to soft music and holding hands across the table, both felt a deep sense of peace. Their wedding wouldn't just be a ceremony, it would be a celebration of how love breaks down barriers and brings people together in unexpected ways. What they didn't know was that James had one more surprise in store, a secret he'd been keeping for months, one that would make their wedding day even more memorable than anyone could imagine. Looking at Sarah in the soft cafe light, James smiled, knowing that sometimes the greatest gifts come wrapped in the most unexpected packages. The morning of Sarah and James's wedding dawned with perfect spring weather in Atlanta. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows of the historic Mason house, creating colorful patterns on the wooden floors. The old mansion buzzed with activity as families and friends moved about with last-minute preparations. In the bridal suite upstairs, Sarah sat at an antique vanity mirror while her mother Patricia fussed with her veil. The dress they'd chosen was elegant, an ivory gown with delicate lace details that complemented her deep brown skin perfectly. "Mama, I can't believe you're not crying yet," Sarah teased, watching her mother's reflection. "Oh, baby girl, just wait. I'm saving my tears for when I see you walk down that aisle," Patricia replied, carefully adjusting a pearl hairpin, a family heirloom worn by 4 generations of Bennett women. Down the hall, in a specially prepared room, James sat with his father Robert and best man Mike. His black tuxedo had been carefully tailored to look perfect whether he was seated or moving. His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his bow tie. "Son," Robert said, placing a steady hand on James's shoulder, "I've never been more proud of you than I am today." A knock at the door brought in young Tommy, the ring bearer, already proudly wearing his mini tuxedo. "Uncle James. Grandma says it's almost time," he announced excitedly. The ceremony space had been transformed into something magical. White chairs lined either side of a wide aisle, decorated with jazz-inspired blue and silver ribbons. Instead of traditional flower arrangements, each row ended with vintage brass instruments filled with white roses, a creative touch that perfectly represented the couple. Mrs. Mason had outdone herself with the accessibility arrangements. The entire aisle was smooth and wide, and the altar area had been specially modified to ensure James could move freely during the ceremony. As guests began taking their seats, the jazz quartet, handpicked by James's mother Eleanor, played soft renditions of classic love songs. Mr. Johnson from the Jazz Cafe sat in the front row, beaming like a proud uncle. The ceremony began with a beautiful surprise. Maya, James's sister, stepped up to sing "What a Wonderful World" as the wedding party entered. Sarah's bridesmaids, led by Maria, walked down the aisle in deep blue dresses that seemed to float as they moved. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. As the music changed to a jazz arrangement of the wedding march, the doors opened to reveal Sarah with her father, Marcus Bennett. James felt his breath catch in his throat. Sarah was radiant, her smile lighting up the entire room. As she walked down the aisle, their eyes locked, and suddenly everyone else seemed to fade away. The officiant, Dr. Thompson from the hospital who had watched their love story unfold from the beginning, smiled warmly as Sarah reached the altar. Her father kissed her cheek before taking his seat, already reaching for Patricia's hand. "Friends and family," Dr. Thompson began, "we gather here today to celebrate a love that reminds us that true connection knows no barriers." The couple had written their own vows. James went first, his voice steady despite his emotion. "Sarah Bennett, you walked into my life at a hospital fundraiser, and instead of seeing a man in a wheelchair, you saw me. You laughed at my terrible medical jokes, you shared my passion for helping others, and you showed me that love doesn't need legs to dance." Sarah wiped away tears as she delivered her vows. "James Richardson, you rolled into my heart with your brilliant mind and beautiful soul. You taught me that strength comes in many forms, and that true love isn't about walking through life together. It's about moving forward together, no matter how we get there." Tommy presented the rings right on cue, without his remote control car, and as they exchanged bands, both families dabbed at their eyes. Patricia had finally given in to her tears, while Eleanor beamed proudly beside her. "By the power vested in me," Dr. Thompson proclaimed, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." As James and Sarah shared their first kiss as a married couple, the jazz quartet burst into a joyous rendition of "At Last." The audience erupted in applause and cheers, celebrating not just a marriage, but a love story that proved that the heart knows no limitations. Little did the guests know, the most surprising moment of this celebration was yet to come, waiting for them at the reception, where James's months of secret preparation would lead to an unforgettable revelation. The reception hall of the historic Mason House glowed with warmth as twilight settled over Atlanta. Crystal chandeliers cast a soft golden light over tables decorated with blue and silver centerpieces, each featuring miniature musical instruments and twinkling lights. The atmosphere buzzed with excitement as guests moved from the ceremony to the celebration. Sarah noticed something unusual right away. James's family members kept exchanging mysterious glances, and his physical therapist, Dr. Rodriguez, was present despite not being on the original guest list. Even more intriguing, she spotted what looked like medical equipment partially hidden behind the stage curtains. "Is everything okay?" she whispered to James as they entered the hall to thunderous applause. "Everything is perfect," he replied with a smile that held a secret. "Just trust me." Their grand entrance had been carefully choreographed. As the MC announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. and Mrs. Richardson." Sarah wheeled James in, both of them doing a playful spin as they entered. The crowd cheered at their coordinated move. The dinner service began with a fusion of soul food and modern cuisine, another way they had blended their family's traditions. Patricia beamed with pride as guests raved about her secret recipe macaroni and cheese, while Eleanor Richardson's lemon pound cake disappeared within minutes. Between courses, Sarah noticed more unusual activity. Mike, the best man, kept disappearing behind the stage, and James's sister Maya seemed to be coordinating something with the DJ. Even young Tommy was involved, carefully guarding a mysterious corner of the room. "Your family is up to something," Sarah said to James during dinner. "Maybe they're just excited about the cake," he replied with a wink that made her laugh and temporarily forget her suspicions. The traditional reception activities began. Maria delivered a touching maid of honor speech about watching Sarah and James fall in love during hospital fundraisers and jazz nights. Mike's best man speech had everyone rolling with laughter as he recalled James's terrible attempts at flirting with medical puns. He actually asked her if she had a map because he kept getting lost in her eyes. in the middle of a discussion about hospital navigation software. Mike shared, making James groan and Sarah giggle at the memory. The father-daughter dance was a beautiful moment, with Sarah and Marcus Bennett swaying to Unforgettable. Patricia wiped away tears as she watched them, remembering how she had once worried about her daughter's choices, and now couldn't imagine a better match for Sarah. As the evening progressed, the energy in the room seemed to shift. James's parents began moving to specific positions around the dance floor. Dr. Rodriguez disappeared behind the stage, and the DJ's booth was temporarily taken over by Eleanor, who had insisted on handling the music for this particular moment. Sarah was chatting with her college roommate when she noticed James wasn't in his usual spot. Looking around, she saw him deep in conversation with Dr. Rodriguez near the stage. Their serious expressions made her heart skip. Was something wrong? "Sarah, honey," Patricia called, drawing her attention. "Come here for a moment. I need your opinion on something." As Sarah moved to join her mother, she noticed guests being quietly repositioned around the dance floor, creating a large open space in the center. The lighting changed subtly, becoming softer and more focused on the middle of the room. "What's going on, Mama?" Sarah asked, but Patricia just smiled mysteriously. "You'll see, baby girl, some surprises are worth waiting for." The DJ's voice came over the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention, please. The groom has a special presentation for his bride." Sarah's heart began to race as she turned toward the stage. The lights dimmed except for a single spotlight illuminating the center of the dance floor. The opening notes of "What a Wonderful World," their song, began to play, but in a slower, more dramatic arrangement. James's voice came through the speakers, though she couldn't see him yet. "Sarah, from the moment we met, you've shown me that love has no limitations. Tonight, I want to show you something I've been working on for the past 8 months." The crowd held its collective breath as the stage curtains began to part, and Sarah caught a glimpse of something that would change their lives forever. The biggest surprise of the evening was about to unfold, and not a single guest was prepared for what they were about to witness. The spotlight followed James as he emerged from behind the curtains, still in his wheelchair but wearing what appeared to be some kind of mechanical braces on his legs. Dr. Rodriguez stood nearby, along with 2 technicians Sarah had never seen before. The room fell completely silent. "Sarah," James's voice carried clearly through the microphone he now held, "for the past 8 months, while we were planning our wedding, I was also participating in a revolutionary medical trial at Atlanta Medical Research Center." Sarah's hands flew to her mouth as she began to understand what was happening. Maria quickly appeared beside her, holding her steady as James continued. "Dr. Rodriguez and her team developed a new robotic assistance system that works with patients like me," James explained, his voice full of emotion. "I wanted to wait until our wedding day to show you because, well, I wanted to give you the first dance you deserve." The technicians moved forward, making final adjustments to the mechanical braces. Dr. Rodriguez nodded encouragingly to James. Sarah noticed tears in the doctor's eyes, something she'd never seen from the usually composed physician. "Now, I need to be honest," James continued, smiling. "This isn't a miracle cure. I can't walk normally yet, and I may never be able to. But with this system," he paused, taking a deep breath, "with this system, I can stand and take a few steps. And tonight, my love, I want to dance with my wife." The room collectively gasped as James pressed a button on his wheelchair's armrest. With a soft whirring sound, the mechanical braces activated. Slowly, steadily, James began to rise from his wheelchair. Sarah felt her knees weaken as she watched her husband stand for the first time. Patricia gripped her daughter's hand, while Eleanor Richardson openly wept in her husband's arms. Young Tommy jumped up and down, shouting, "Uncle James is standing! Uncle James is standing!" The music swelled as James took his first careful step toward Sarah. Dr. Rodriguez and the technicians stayed close but didn't interfere. Each step was deliberate, calculated, but unmistakably real. The look of concentration on James's face reminded Sarah of when he was solving complex coding problems. Focused, determined, unstoppable. "I practice for hours every day," James said as he moved closer, his voice shaking with effort and emotion. "Fell down more times than I can count. But I kept thinking about this moment, about dancing with you." Sarah couldn't hold back her tears as James finally reached her. He stretched out his hand, just like he had that first night at the hospital fundraiser. "May I have this dance, Mrs. Richardson?" Unable to speak through her tears, Sarah nodded and stepped into his embrace. The mechanical braces hummed softly as James held her, swaying gently to the music. They weren't doing any fancy moves, just simple side-to-side steps, but to everyone watching, it was the most beautiful dance they'd ever seen. "I can't believe you did this," Sarah finally whispered against his chest. "All those extra physical therapy sessions. Every second was worth it," James replied, holding her close. "Though I have to admit, keeping this secret was the hardest part, especially from a nurse who knows all the signs of muscle strain." Their guests watched in awe as the couple shared their first dance. There wasn't a dry eye in the house. Even Mr. Johnson from the Jazz Cafe was openly sobbing into his handkerchief. Mike filmed everything on his phone, his hands shaking so much that Maya had to help him steady the camera. As the song came to an end, James spoke again, his voice carrying across the silent room. "Sarah, you've shown me that love isn't about what a person can or can't do. It's about who they are in their heart. This dance isn't just about me standing up. It's about us rising together, facing whatever challenges come our way." The room erupted in applause as they finished their dance. James carefully returned to his wheelchair, exhausted but beaming with joy. Dr. Rodriguez and her team received their own round of applause, though they tried to stay in the background, insisting this moment belonged to the couple. Sarah couldn't stop smiling as she looked at her husband, seeing not just the man who had worked so hard to surprise her with this dance, but the person who had captured her heart with his mind, his humor, and his boundless determination to make their love story even more extraordinary than she could have imagined. The rest of the wedding reception flowed with an electric energy that could only come from witnessing something truly extraordinary. As James sat back in his wheelchair, receiving hugs and congratulations from emotional guests, Sarah noticed how his eyes never left her, as if making sure she was still as happy as the moment he first stood. "You know," Sarah said, wheeling him to their sweetheart table, "you didn't have to do all this to impress me. I fell in love with you, not your ability to stand or walk." James took her hand, kissing it gently. "I know that. That's exactly why I wanted to do it. Because you loved me completely, just as I was." The evening continued with a perfect blend of traditional reception activities and spontaneous celebrations. Patricia and Eleanor had temporarily forgotten their competition over who made the better sweet potato pie and were now sitting together, watching their children with tear-stained faces and proud smiles. "Did you see her face when he stood up?" Patricia kept saying to anyone who would listen. "My baby girl got her fairy tale, but better. She got something real." Dr. Rodriguez joined them briefly to explain more about the robotic assistance system. "James was one of our most dedicated patients," she shared. "He would practice for hours, even when he was exhausted from wedding planning. His determination was incredible. Young Tommy had appointed himself the official guardian of James' robot legs, as he called them, and kept other curious children from getting too close to the equipment. My uncle is like Iron Man now, he announced proudly to anyone who would listen. Later in the evening, Maria clinked her glass for attention. I think it's time for the bride to share her thoughts about this amazing surprise, she suggested, passing the microphone to Sarah. Sarah stood, looking at her husband with eyes full of love. James Richardson, you never cease to amaze me. 8 months ago, you proposed to me on a rooftop under the stars. I thought that would be the most magical moment of our relationship. But watching you today, seeing your dedication and love, I realize that magic isn't in the big moments. It's in every single day we choose each other. She paused, wiping away happy tears. You didn't just show me you could stand today. You showed me, once again, why I fell in love with you, your determination, your creativity, and your ability to make the impossible possible. But most importantly, she smiled mischievously, you proved that you'll do anything to avoid letting me lead in our dance. The room erupted in laughter, and James pretended to look offended before breaking into a grin. As the night drew to a close, guests began to leave, each carrying with them the memory of a truly remarkable celebration. Mr. Johnson, who had stayed until the very end, approached the couple. You know, he said thoughtfully, in all my years running that jazz club, I've seen countless couples dance. But what you two have, that's the kind of rhythm that lasts a lifetime. The final surprise came when James and Sarah prepared to leave. Instead of the traditional grand exit, they had arranged for the remaining guests to form a circle. In the center, James once again stood with the help of his braces, and they shared one more short dance under the starlit Atlanta sky. "Ready to start our next adventure?" James asked as they finally got into their decorated car. "With you, always," Sarah replied, squeezing his hand. As they drove away from the historic Mason house, both reflected on how their wedding day had become so much more than a ceremony. It was a testament to the power of love, determination, and the courage to break down barriers. "You know what this means, right?" Sarah said suddenly, turning to James with a grin. "What's that?" "Now you have no excuse not to help with the dishes." James laughed, the sound mixing with the tin cans rattling behind their car. "There's my practical nurse, already planning our domestic future." As they headed toward their honeymoon destination, both knew that while James' ability to stand and take a few steps was remarkable, it wasn't the most important part of their story. Their true strength lay in their partnership, their understanding, and their willingness to face whatever challenges life presented, together. The stars twinkled above them as they drove into their future, ready to write the next chapters of their extraordinary love story, one day at a time.